G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, a brilliant start to your week. Happy Monday. So today we do have a lot to go over, as we always do. So of course we will look at the maps, we'll compare the maps, and we'll look at some footage as well. We'll look in the north, the south, and the east and see where the changes are and see the threat of some areas that could be enveloped as well. There are some very interesting map changes to show you today. As far as the future on the war, we know that Zelensky has landed in the US and is there to present mainly his victory plan. So we'll look at an interview today with Zelensky, and this really does give us an idea about, firstly, what's in the plan, how the future of the war is, and how the current war and the status is, as well as we'll look at what he said about Kursk, other weapons, and support. I think you'll find that very interesting as well. And of course, we need to look over strikes and weapon systems used that I believe are strategically important. Now, I cop a lot of flack if you didn't show this, didn't show that. A lot of the strikes I show, whether it's a weapon being used or the strike, is either for a geolocation or something I believe is both strategically important as well. So we'll go over that, and look, that's actually where we will start today. Now, the one I actually want to show you is this part of footage here. Now, for the first time, or being reported for the first time, a glide munition, of course, which we do know has caused massive destruction on the front line, and in my opinion, has been one of the primary reasons why Russia was able to advance over this year. And in the concern too is, yes, we saw the fabs in 23, but they weren't dialed in, they weren't en masse, especially over the winter period when ground movements really stop. There is a sense of concern as what happens in winter when ground movements stop. These airplanes, these fabs will continue to be devastating, but actually may have more effect. So we'll see how that goes. But for the first time, it's being reported that a fab has hit Zaporizhzhia as well. And this is the footage that we have out here. Of course, you can see a large explosion. Now, something you're going to see in these videos, I am not knowledgeable enough to say, yep, that is how big that explosion is. And I think many people are. Some people say that's 50,000 tons, and other experts saying, well, that's more like 200 tons. But what we can see there is that a fab has hit likely 250 or 500 kilograms. Now, this does pose a large issue. We know the devastation of the fabs, and what we also know is that Zaporizhzhia was believed to be somewhat right on the edge of the range of those, or out of range. But if you remember back in my videos, if you're an avid watcher, on September the 6th, I did then show you this, that what was being presented was the updated Russian fabs are entering service with the Russian aerospace forces, and they'll be able to reach these areas. As for now, they fly 78 to 85 kilometers. For comparison, the flight range of the lightest Fab 500 is 50 to 60 kilometers, so a 25% increase. Now, of course, one thing we know with any glide munition like this, just environmental factors, the height of the aircraft, the speed, these are going to have huge effects on that range. So it's going to be difficult to know the exact range, as well as just classifications around some of this equipment, but saying larger wings, improved aerodynamics. And we've also seen some fabs with a small like rocket engine on them to give them a little bit more oomph too. So this is a very interesting update in here. Now, some asked me about, well, what sort of range are we looking at on these? And I thought, well, let's jump onto the map and show you. So from the very outskirts of occupied territory to the middle of ZAP is around 35, 36 kilometers, believed to be sort of the right on the pinnacle max range of those systems. Of course, these aircraft are flying very, very fast. They need to turn. A Su-34 does not have the turning radius an F-16 or Su-35 does, and is still very susceptible to air defense. So I said, look, they want to be further back. And when we start looking at here, likely somewhere around that 50 or 60k mark, which is why I believe this was out of range for some time, with this footage coming out, as well as the information over the past couple of weeks may be falling within range. Now, there were reports that there was interruptions to the water and electricity in parts of ZAP as well. So what will this have into the future? Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that is an important update as well. Something that does protect these aircraft too is the Dnieper a little bit. Of course, there's no air defense out in here. So if they are further back in here, the chance of interception, if you're one of these pilots, is somewhat less. We do know these planes definitely come into range of that AD, able to drop and get out. They can still be absolutely shot down, but the longer the range, the less time frame these planes are going to be actually in interceptable distance for Ukrainian aircraft or air defense systems as well. So I believe that is an important update on what we have seen. Now, we have, of course, seen many Ukrainian large drone strikes against Russian ammo depots back in Russia, and these have been very successful over the past couple of days. And we're starting to get some higher resolution imagery of this as well. So this is the Tikhorets, the most recent one here that we see, and this imagery here. Now, again, I do believe it is difficult to say exactly what the amount of damage is here, considering that a large portion of these may be under the earth as well, and the lack of large craters of maybe those underground magazines blowing up. That is difficult, but of course, there's a hell of a lot of damage on the surface here, and a hell of a lot around. See the train line here? Seems to be the most around that area. That is important in a second. Now, the 23rd GRAU Arsenal at Oktyabrsk as well. We see this too. We see these images come out. MT Anderson shared these images and what he has said about this. So we see some of these images of the destruction. Now, one of the first things I do see is that the fires in the trees here significantly less than I would have actually expected, but there's a hell of a lot of damage to these areas. So that to me means very direct hits, but also not too much spreading of the fire between here as well. I thought all that would have been burnt down, if you get what I'm meaning, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. But you can see the amount of damage to these storage facilities here of this ammunition. You can see some of these blown apart, as well as where fire has come through. Again, I will say I'm no expert to say exactly how much damage has been caused to these, but of course, if I see something exploded, well, I'm smart enough to know this. But the 58 building and multiple open areas have been turned to ash, so completely destroyed and or heavily damaged in here. So of course, very successful strikes against these areas. Now, rail unloading, loading areas were hit as well. Appears ammunition trains were likely there during the strike. This is the exact same thing I showed you just on the other ammo depot just before these images as well, where the train's running. Now, that actually does line up with then what fighter bomber said about these strikes are hitting when those trains are being unloaded or loaded and the ammo is out in the open. So that is very interesting. And will we see some change to how Russia operate with the trains and ammunition if that is the weak point in there to be hit? So that is important. Now, we see this as well being shared by a Ukrainian media too, that Ukraine received verbal consent to finance the missile program from partners. So verbal consent for financing, and the issue is one of the highest priorities. Now, of course, these are longer range. The image shown here is the Palatsia, the missile sort of drone thing, but as well we know to develop other domestic missiles. Of course, this gets around then the problems with Western missiles being used back inside Russia that the Western states are worried about. I've spoken about this. I think the main focus should be more domestically produced. We want money to do this rather than just the weapon system itself. One problem that still arises, though, is if it is like GPS guided targeting, satellite guided stuff like this, is Russia will still turn back and go, yeah, but it's still using all the targeting systems from your GPS, your satellites, this and that. Is that make or break? No, I don't believe so, but it's something to be aware of. And I believe the success we have seen with those drones en masse, that is what we're going to continue, I believe, to see more of. Now, speaking of drones, missile drones, updated weapon systems, we need to have a look over some of these. So Iran has unveiled its Jihad missile with enhanced capability. So said to be a ballistic missile in here. Now, of course, we've seen then the Houthis use their first claimed one of these as well going into Israel. And this, of course, is a big problem in this whole area of the world. So that is an interesting one to look at. Ballistic missile with a range of 1,000 canes, dual missile launcher that distinguishes from Iranian liquid fueled missile. So very interesting systems coming out as well. Of course, we know the Western states, or some have pointed that there's the axis of upheaval that they include Russia, China, Iran, North Korea within, and more information sharing here. We'll go into this, that Iran has unveiled, this is the same thing, the Shahed 136 Bravo attack drone. Now, the difference in this, and we've seen the Shahed, or the Quran, it's very similar, of course, updated throughout too. So what we see here is they're claiming that it boasts several significant upgrades. They're saying a range between 2,500 and 4,000 kilometers. And of course, the significant upgrade, which is very obvious by the photograph, is it's using a turbojet engine rather than a small propeller. And they're claiming improved stealth capabilities. Now, we see these allegations Tehran is supplying arms to Russia. We know that that is occurring. We've seen the officials go to Iran and vice versa. But what I've put in here, and this is the concern about some of the escalation here too, is that Russia gets a lot of arms or some arms from Tehran or Iran, then Iran gets some, maybe of that technology, some of the R&D back from Russia. Proxies then can get improved weapon systems for what they say is their mission, but then that also helps, of course, the US get stretched, so Iran and Russia are happy with that as well. And this is that whole a conventional through proxy war that we are seeing, and we will see that the H guys in other areas of the world will have improved systems, and this leaking down through too. And I've also added though in this that of course then Willie gets his ad revenue because it gives me content to speak about. So will we see those pop up in Russia? I think likely. Is there definitely some trade of tech for equipment and that leaks down to other areas of the globe? Absolutely as well. Now, another weapon I want to speak on is this. What I've been seeing more and more, and we see, geez, that's loud, in this footage here, is said to be a Fab 3000 being used in Kursk. And you can see very large explosion here. Now, one thing of which I've been seeing through a lot of like Russian pages since the beginning of the Kursk operation was they were reluctant to use Fab 500s through to Fab 3000s in Kursk within Russia's own borders, just due to the damage of infrastructure. And one thing I have been seeing is more use of Fabs within Russia's own borders, as well as today this footage of a Fab 3000 being used here. Of course, the damage to infrastructure and collateral damage from these systems can be massive. Now, a very embarrassing failure has happened as well here. So we see that this is a launch site for a RS-28 Samad then system. Now, of course, this does not have the nuclear warhead on board. This is merely the delivery rocket system for that. But in Russia, they have had a test launch of that delivery vehicle, and it has exploded on the launch site, causing a large crater as well, seen by these satellite imageries. Now, this failed launch, this does not change the calculation of the mutually assured destruction, nor does it now mean that they don't have the systems available to deliver a nuclear warhead. As embarrassing as this must be, it doesn't then mean that. And we see this, of course, with only earlier this year that the UK missile deterrent failed to fire a test missile, reportedly landing close to a launch site for the second time in a row. And the reason I bring that up is this does not mean that the UK doesn't have deliverable systems either. This doesn't just mean that there's now no red lines, it's safe to do this, that. No, it definitely doesn't change the calculations around these treaties. There are multiple ways to deliver systems like this, and even with a 90% failure rate or 90% intercept rate, this is still enough to cause absolute catastrophe all around the world. So I just thought those are some interesting bits and pieces to look at and go over today. And now we will jump onto the maps and we'll have a look. So of course, where we were down looking in ZAP. We need to zoom out, and here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014. The red check we see is ground that Russia has made and is occupying, that has been made over the past 24 hours. The green and blue within Ukraine's borders are area where Russia has been and it's either been pushed out or withdrawn from. The blue in Kursk is area where Ukraine is occupying back into Russia. Now, let's talk about some areas and then we'll talk specifically about Kursk. But the first place that you want me to go is, of course, down in Vuhledar, if you've seen any of these maps today. And you can see there is a very large advancement here. Now, remember, anywhere in these borders at the moment, whether it is Ukrainian gain, Russian gain, just due to how stagnant the front line has been, how dug in all these positions are, any movement can be fairly significant in here, especially in somewhere as defended as this, where we've seen Russia throw so many assets to try and get some amount of ground into Vuhledar over 18 months and no real success. Well, today, this is a significant amount of ground being made. And let me measure it from here to here, about, let's go 3 kilometers. And if we go then crossways, about 5.3, although we do have over the past couple of days some geolocations showing some positions up in here. But what you can see by this, you don't need to be a military colonel to see that what Russia is trying to do is envelop this. And what we did think was that Russia had thrown so many assets trying frontal assaults on here. They've gone, we just can't do that. Let's try and go around and envelop it more so. So this is, of course, developing in here, and you can see grey zone within Vuhledar itself. So we will wait and see what continues in here. And then, of course, we do have then the Syriac map update in here. Now, he showed these first movements the other day, but now these maps are showing very similar. I actually do believe the deep state here is showing further red into Vuhledar itself, which, of course, I'm more inclined if the deep state links with the Ukrainian MOD are showing a Russian gain, I'm more inclined to believe that, if that makes sense. Same as if a Russian map showed a Ukrainian gain, I'd be more inclined if it was further than the Russian map's showing, I'd be further inclined to show that, if that makes sense. Anyway, situation in southwest Donetsk. During the last hours, Russian army made significant advances on the northern bank of this river, increasing the buffer zone in localities around here, where the latter seized a large part of the northern warehouses around in here. The movements took place this week. Russian forces managed to advance south of Vuhledar and northwest of Mikhailsky, where Russian troops managed to raise the ruins of the Vuhledar suburbs. As a result of these events, the famous locality and semi-closed situation as the last supply lines through the countryside have been taken under fire control. It is possible that the Ukrainian command will consider withdrawing from the area as Russians continue to develop the encirclement. Now, what we have seen over the past couple of weeks, couple of months, is this main road, Konstantinivka, Vuhledar, come under control, and now there is this last remaining road through here, and supply lines are coming under threat and fire control as well. Again, we'll continue to see how this develops in and around this area. This is being further confirmed. I've got a Noel Reports' map in here too. Now, he's showing maybe less than both maps, but again, we can confirm 100% that there was definitely some gain in and around these areas. Now, we're just going to move up to the north a little bit. Of course, we have the Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, now Kursk front. So it was at one point the Avdiivka front, now Kursk down the south, and Pokrovsk. These are the areas which we believe Russia is really trying to push for. And you can see further advancement out to the west, out to the west of Ukrainsk and the south of Ukrainsk as well. Of course, we've spoken about the importance of this railway line and how that could be used to launch, of course, then a northern flank push into Seladove as well in here, and further movement and actions happening here. Now, one thing I want to speak about, of course, an area in here is Minograd. Now, I shared with you on the September 19th, at least is when the message came through, so I probably shared it with you on September the 20th from one of my friends who's in this area. It's clusterfuck. I think Dragon's Teeth, I've noticed over the past 2 weeks, still dumped on the side of the road where they had dumped weeks ago. Sent this through, 3, 4, 5 days ago. Now, this video has come out today from Minograd on, of course, the Ukrainian side, showing Dragon's Teeth dumped on the side of the road. Now, this wasn't sent to me through the same guy. I found this on Twitter from many pages sharing this in Minograd. So it is a concern of the defensive positions that are taking place and holding, or where things will push in this exact area. Now, we'll have a look at then Pokrovsk, Kursk front in here. Now, this is lining up very similar. So we see push out towards train line, similar-ish ground made. Push out south of Ukrainsk, of course, similar areas are moving here by the map. So we can confirm there was definitely some level of advancement in there, and that this whole Pokrovsk sort of front here, this has not stopped. I don't even believe it has slowed down. I believe it has then sped up over the past couple of weeks, months. To my opinion, lines up exactly with Kursk. Now we see, and I don't believe that this is a change on the map today, but this is New York, Donetsk, and this fill-in between New York and Donetsk. Now, Syriac map, he showed that this in here has been filled in, as we see like this. That has been filled in for then the last couple of weeks. I believe this may be catching up, but you can see that the deep state map shows more control just out in this Donetsk front too, but it doesn't show what Syriac is claiming about the movement out to Leonivka as well. So we'll wait and see on this, and we then, of course, have Syriac's map in here today. He, of course, is showing this movement further out, Leonidivka here, and some other pushes through to the east, which aren't being shown out from Zalazne as well, over these mines in Nepelivka. So we will wait and see, of course, large changes and differences between these maps. We'll wait for more geolocations. We'll wait for more confirmations of areas before we go too much in the deep end. So let's have a look. We'll just continue to move. Of course, we're in Bakhmut here. This is an area which we do presume looks fairly different around Klishkivka, but we did see this blue turn up yesterday, day before, maybe day before, between the 21st and the 22nd, where Ukraine had made ground to the south of Privilia. And we then get this confirmed by Surak map today, same exact area that Ukrainian army had recaptured these positions in here. So bang, that can be confirmed that definitely took place. Now, let's continue up the map and we'll finish up in Kursk and what Zelensky has said around this. So let's go to then Nevsky first, where we of course saw that advancement through by the Russian forces into Nevsky. Now, this is significantly different now today in here when we have a look at the Syriac map. So let's line this up. We have Nevsky in the middle. As a result of withdrawal of the Ukrainian army on the eastern shores of Zerbets River, the Russian army secured all this area and completely the locality of Nevsky. So he is saying that Nevsky has come under complete control, but you can see as well the amount of ground out to the north that is showing significantly different by these maps, really filling in right down in here, of course, on the shores, Zerbets running across. So large change in here, at least being shown by Surak more, I'm not going to draw in, but through that specific area. Now let's continue pushing up into the Pishani front in here, where we have seen this real spire come out, of course trying to reach the Oskil to split into a north and south region. And we see Syriac with, again, another update just down in the south area here. To my eye, these maps looking fairly similar, and this was the other day between the so yesterday, then lining that up. So these maps now showing that definitely then occurred. So let's have a look on Kursk. Let's have a look where the changes are being made and where they are or aren't. So we jump on then Noel reports, and he shows this push out into here down in the south, pushing then east of this front. Now, this is actually lining up more so with then what Deep State has been showing in and around here as far as grey zone blue as well. This is not great to line up because the labeling here is really off. Showing controlled ground back in and around here, of course, just to the southwest of Lyubimovka as well. Of course, what we have had is Russian claims in Sedeligovo, what would change the whole aspect of here due to where these supply roads are running up into the Kodenovo area. But that is the only change we've seen in the maps around Kursk for a while. But let's look at what Zelensky has spoken about in a recent interview about this. So let's talk about Kursk. What is the motive? Who's the intended audience? Putin, to show him that Ukraine too can go on the offensive, or Ukraine's Western partners to demonstrate to them what Ukraine can achieve if given the proper resources. Both these motives are important, but there is more at stake here. First, it was clear to us that Russia was pressing us in the east. No matter how the Kursk operation ends, military analysts will someday calculate the speed of Russia's progress and ask what prevented us from stopping them earlier. How fast were they moving in the east before the Kursk operation, and why? Ukraine had trouble mobilizing people, they might say, and didn't have enough strength to stop them. But that is diverting the focus from the more pertinent point, namely the fact that we should receive what we've been promised. I say, first, give it to us, and then analyse if the root cause of the problems is with Ukraine or with you. So one thing in here is I believe that the Kursk operation has actually sped up the movement in the east, and I have data and the map movements from Deep State to show that is factual as well. But one thing that Zelensky is saying here is it's not the problem with Ukraine, it's with you, that it's because you haven't given these systems, therefore we have to do this, and that the historians may look back and military analysts in the future and go, the reason Ukraine had these issues was not mobilizing, it wasn't enough people, it was that your weapons that you had promised weren't delivered on time. And I think, personally, we're going to see, and I'm seeing this on Twitter and Telegram already, more and more blame shifted across onto delivery of systems, not on to command, control, measure failures, or military strategic decisions made either. It's going to more onto, well, this happened because of Biden's reluctance to supply this, or that this was promised from Spain and it never arrived. I think we'll see more and more of that. Now, is that happening? Yeah, that is definitely a factor, but there are other factors, of course, involved. Now he continues. Imagine you're struggling in a tough war. You're not receiving aid. You strain to maintain morale. And the Russians have the initiative in the east. They have taken parts of Kharkiv region, and they're about to attack Sumy. So this is what we hear, was that Russia was about to attack Sumy. One thing which sort of goes against this is that Russia didn't seem to have that much actually up in here at the time for a large attack on Sumy, that if they did have these thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers in here for an attack onto Sumy, this wouldn't have had the amount of success that it had. Anyway, you have to do something other than endlessly asking your partners for help. So what do? Do you tell your people the Ukrainians in 2 weeks, eastern Ukraine will cease to exist? Sure, you can do that. You can throw up your hands, but you can also try taking a bold step. Of course, you're right to wonder if this action will go down in history as a success or a failure. It's too early to judge, but it has slowed down the Russians and forced them to move their forces to Kursk on the order of 40,000 troops. Already, our fighters in the east say they are being battered less frequently. Now, I vehemently disagree with some of these. I don't believe it slowed down the Russians in the east at all. I believe it actually sped that up. And yet, with the 40,000 troops, and I've heard up to 60,000 being moved around this area, I haven't yet seen the counteroffensive actions that would represent that in Kursk, or in the east, the amount of that actually moving and where then other attacks could take place. But I have heard, of course, many fighters say that there is some less amount of artillery on some of the eastern areas and northeastern areas as well. I'm not saying it's a resounding success or will bring about the end of the war or the end of Putin. But what it has done is show his partners what we're capable of. We have also shown the global south that Putin, who claims to have everything under control, in fact does not. So PR, I do believe this was a large win, but that can be turned back very quickly. Now, but some Russian people could not help but notice how Putin did not run to defend his own land. No, instead he wants first and foremost to look after himself and finish off Ukraine. His people are not the priority for him. That said, so what he's saying is Russia didn't run to help and push back this with everything. Strategically, that is actually the correct military move, in my opinion. And what I've said is I believe that both Russia and Ukraine recognise this. Because what Ukraine was hoping in here is that this would push and that Russia would then rush to the aid here, redivert things to push back on here. And that Russia hasn't done this. So I believe that both have seen that the correct move was probably not to do anything. And we have seen then that moving in the east. And what I've said in here with strategic things, maybe make the border sit and wait. Of course, it's not, great for the citizens and civilians who are caught up in here, but I said the same thing about Volchansk. Maybe let them come in. They've got to have a lot more people on offensive than you doing a defensive, wear them down, pushing back as well. And I believe that Russia didn't take the bait and probably in history will show was actually the correct strategic move in here as well. So, of course, what we know is Zelensky's on his way. I believe he's landed now in New York. And what we're going to get from this is him presenting the peace plan, the victory plan, and we'll get a better idea. I'm not sure when we will actually get to see this. But what I do fear in this is if the main fulcrum hinge point of this is an official invitation to NATO, the joining of NATO before the end of the war, that potentially that this is dead on arrival, because I don't believe there will be an official invitation to NATO unless there will be an official end of the war. And what I believe in that too is there's not going to be any level, and I believe that invitation to NATO to actually join will only come after there's no contested ground either. Anyway, so let's look over this same interview with Zelensky. It's recent, and I believe this is important to look over. We get a better idea. I understand that you're going to present this plan to President Biden. The victory plan is a bridge. After the first peace summit, our partners saw that Russia was not prepared for any talks at all. And then, of course, the partners said, well, next time we'll invite them to the second summit and they'll come running. Well, now we have the second summit planned and they don't look like they'll come running. Now, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, what they have been stated multiple times from Maria Zakharovka through to Sergei Lavrov, that they have said multiple times to the effect of, well, it needs to reflect the reality on the ground. And what we do know is that these are based off the 10-point peace plan, what would mean Russia's giving up all the territory that they have then occupied and made, and also handing over all those officials too. They're not going to come to that if that's the starting then point. And that's why China didn't rock up either. And so the victory plan is a plan to swiftly strengthen Ukraine. A strong Ukraine will force Putin to the negotiating table. I am convinced of that. It's just before. I only saying that now I've put it all on paper with specific arguments and specific steps to strengthen Ukraine during the months of October and November and December and enable a diplomatic end to the war. The difference is this time will be that Putin will have grasped the depth of this plan of our partner's commitment to strengthening us. And he will realise an important fact that if he is not ready to end this war in a way that is fair and just and instead wishes to continue to try and destroy us, then a strengthened Ukraine will not let him do so. So what he's saying is over the next couple of months that Ukraine will have not only the aid, but will have shown Russia the grasp and the depth of the partner's commitment that he will want to come to the table to end this war on Ukraine's then terms. Not only that, but continue pursuing the goal that would considerably weaken Russia and would threaten Putin's own position. What happens if Biden says, with all due respect, this is a difficult time, the election's coming up, I have enough trouble with Congress that trying to increase aid packages for you. Do you have a plan B? We're living in plan B for years. Plan A was proposed before the full-scale war when we called for things, preventative sanctions and preventative reinforcements of Ukraine with various weapons. I told our partners, if Ukraine is very strong, nothing will happen. Like I've said, I believe this war, through many different factors, could have been avoided completely. I'm now proposing plan A. This plan means we change the current course where it's only thanks to the strength of our military, the heroic devotion of the European values of our people and fighters that we've stood ground. If you don't want this war to drag on, if you don't want Putin to bury us under the corpses of his own people, taking more Ukrainian lives in the process, we offer you a plan to strengthen Ukraine. It is not fantasy and not science fiction, and importantly, it does not require the Russians to cooperate to succeed. Rather, the plan spells out what our partners can do without Russia's participation. If diplomacy is the desire of both sides, then before diplomacy can be effective, our plan's implementation depends only on us and our partners. So he's saying that Russia does not have to cooperate in this, they don't have to participate in this, that it's going to be so much here in this victory plan that Russia will want to come to the table on Ukraine's terms. So I have no idea what's going to be in this, but that NATO, yeah, that might show that, but I don't believe that is in the realm of realistic at this point in time. Otherwise, it would have happened 2.5 years ago. You're right. This plan is designed, first and foremost, with Biden's support in mind. If he doesn't want to support it, I cannot force him. If he refuses, well, then we must continue to live inside Plan B, and that is unfortunate. What would that look like? I mean, what if Biden says no? It would mean Biden doesn't want to end the war in any way that denies Russia a victory. We would end up with a very long war, an impossible, exhausting situation that would kill a tremendous number of people, but he can't blame Biden for anything. At the end of the day, he took a powerful historic step to support Ukraine. That step has already constituted a historic victory. What would you say, maybe not even to Biden, but to the American public, many of whom feel that cannot raise our engagement and support to Ukraine any further than we already have? I would tell Ukraine has done everything possible to keep America out of this war. Actually, Putin counted on defeating Ukraine in a quick campaign, and Ukraine not stood its ground. I believe in the future we may see something to try and involve NATO America further in the war. Putin would have marched on. Let's consider what consequence that would have been. Number one, you would have some 40 million immigrants coming to Europe, America, Canada. Saying if Putin was allowed to go through, all Ukrainians would have been pushed out as well. Second, you would lose the largest country in Europe, a huge blow to America's influence on the continent. Russia would now have total influence there. You would lose everyone, Poland, Germany, and your influence would be zero. US need NATO to have influence in Europe and Asia, and a reason to have influence there too. That, hey, we're here, we're providing over 50% of then coverage. I actually believe it's more like 80%, nuclear umbrella too. Therefore, they have an arm reaching in there, which they need to have if they want to continue as a unipolar power. But at the same time, NATO absolutely needs US security. Even if Ukraine was to fall, Poland and Germany would then even strengthen ties further because then they're on that absolute borderline there as well. So, yeah. Anyway, during the presidential debate, mediators asked Trump whether he wanted the war to stop. He says he wants the war to stop. We do too. But he says that he doesn't know how to stop the war, even if he might think he knows how. With this war, often the deeper you look, the less you understand. Absolutely true. Apart from Trump's own reluctance to talk about Ukraine's victory, he has chosen J.D. Vance as VP. Zelensky says he's too radical. Vance has come out with a more precise plan, and Zelensky said to give up our territories. Your words, not mine. But yes, that's the gist of it. His message seems to be that Ukraine must make a sacrifice. This brings us back to the question of cost and who shoulders it. The idea the world should end this war at Ukraine's expense is unacceptable. Ukraine shoulders the cost of stopping the war by giving up its territories, but there's certainly no way this could ever happen. This kind of scenario would have no basis in international norms, UN statute, in justice, and wouldn't necessarily end the war either. It's just sloganeering. So pointing at a few things here that then maybe the war would continue at a later date, but why should Ukraine have to give up this area? That is unacceptable, but also saying that there's no way this could ever happen, so Ukraine will never give up then its territories here. But what I've said is I believe that this isn't fair. But what I've said is the old quote of, in war it doesn't matter who's right, it matters who is left. And could you make an argument, I think you can make a very good argument looking at demographics and people, that the continuation is now going to be at further expense of the Ukrainian people and the demographics here, which we know there's demographic crisis, who ultimately shoulder the cost and that sacrifice, and the sacrifice between the continuation of the war and the people being lost, the further demographic crisis here versus territories and where that may go. I believe Ukraine is the people. The Ukraine is because of Ukrainians, not specifically maybe then these grounds. And I'm not saying they should give them up. I'm not saying it's fair, but a continuation means you're going to have significantly larger losses, but of course has significant impacts everywhere. And there's no guarantee of victory reclaiming those territories either. What does it mean for Ukrainian people? Such ideas and slogans are risking to power. Vance and others who share his views should clearly understand the moment they are trading on our territory is the moment they start pointing America's interests elsewhere. The Middle East, for example, as well as Taiwan, the US relations with China. Whichever president or vice president raises this prospect that ending the war hinges on cementing the status quo with Ukraine, simply giving up its land, should be held responsible for potentially starting a global war, because such a person would be implying that this kind of behaviour is acceptable. And that's what we've heard, is that if there is a precedent set that you can go in, take this land, and then hold it, it's yours, what then would deter other countries such as China to Taiwan or this country to that, taking a part of ground and holding it as their own? I don't take Vance's word seriously, because if this were a plan, then America's headed for global conflict. I think we're probably headed that way either, but maybe through proxies, not great states. It will involve Israel, Lebanon, Iran, Taiwan, and China. Well, basically all of these, except for Taiwan and China, are currently in war, as well as many African countries. That approach would broadcast to the world the following implicit rule: I came, I conquered, now it is mine. It will apply everywhere: land claims, mineral rights, and borders between nations. It would imply that whoever asserts control over territory, not the rightful owner, but whoever came in a month or a week ago with a machine gun in hand, is the one in charge. We'll end up in a war where might is right, and a completely different world, a global shutdown. And I've put in here an awkward moment for a white dude in Australia. Of course, historically, this coming in with a weapon where might is right, historically, all throughout the world is how many, basically every corner of the world, if you look at any historical time, has been. I'm not saying it is right, but historically, yeah. Will it set a precedent? I'm not sure on that, just due to the strength and cost in some of the other areas of the world in here. And this is exactly why things like NATO exist, to try and deter that ever then occurring. So what precedent does it set? But what is the realistic goal of taking back ground two? And what is the risk versus reward ratio? The risk of, we're going to, because the war's not over till the war's not over, we're going to push the 1991 borders. What does that mean to just the population, demographics, and future there too, versus getting and the return of that area as well? Legends, have a great day. Look after yourself. Sorry this was long, but I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you.